Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game So Terran, to continuing the series on the MiSTer FPGA DE10 Nano project, more importantly today, Conquering Conker. So if you haven't noticed, I've done a 4-part series researching all of the different memory address allocation issues, trying to get Conker's bad fur day to a freeze-free condition so that everyone playing on MiSTer FPGA can play one of the best Nintendo 64 games of all time. And I'm happy to tell you today there is now a patch for the retail version of Conker's bad fur day that is not freezing on the turbo core nor the stock core. Now this is something that I was working on in the background, and my idea was that we could change around the memory addressing so that we had more free contiguous memory addresses, because every time this game would freeze it would be down to a heat memory allocation or other issues in the memory address space, where when it was trying to read or write data it would hit up against a block that had not yet been freed. Now another member of MiSTer Discord watched these videos. He goes by the name of RuleSet, and he decided to do things easier than I was thinking about them. My plan was to rewrite parts of Conker so that the memory address allocation would be sequential and you would always know that there would be free blocks depending on what part of the game you were playing. I probably started work on this about a week ago, and it would take me a few months based upon the amount of stuff I have to do in any given day and week. All what RuleSet did was go in and add access to the memory expansion pack, the RAM expansion, so that the game is going to point towards free RAM at that extra 4 megabyte block, so that you know there couldn't possibly be anything occupying it, because the game was never intended to write to that space in the first place. Now one of the first earliest tests where you could basically guarantee a freeze if you were on the normal core, not turbo, was when you brought back Mrs. B's Hive and the Hornets came to try to recover it. On the standard Nintendo 64 core, 9 out of 10 times you would get a freeze condition right here. I just tested this on the normal Nintendo 64, the release version core, and I was not able to crash it a single time, and that again crash was always due to some issue in memory mapping allocation, where you would either try to be reading or writing from a specific address that was occupied or allocated, so the game basically couldn't access the memory it needed to allocate, and it would crash from there. And we got all this data from the crash handler in the debug prototype version from October 2000. You'll see there you have so many different bits of information, and all of this information was super useful. When I was talking to RuleSet, he said one of the videos when I talked about disabling some of the TLB things in the core led him to start thinking about how he could patch this out and try to get Conker running on 8 megabytes. Now this has not been 100% fully tested. This is day 0 stuff right here, but I wanted to bring it to you guys first because I need your help in testing this. We will have the patch over on MiSTer Discord. If you're not on Discord, you can find me on Twitter and just ask for the patch file. I will send it over. Just not something I'm going to have in the description of the text. It gets a little bit problematic here, but I tested this as much as I could before I went to voiceover to get you guys the video, because I need a large body of people helping us play through Conker's Bad Fur Day to see if there's any lingering crashes. But in my experience, I went through the level select, I went to the areas that were guaranteed crashes for me on the normal non-turbo core, and not a single time was it able to crash on any of those test runs. And again, what I talked about in the previous 4 videos when I was researching Conker and having people help me test and submit data was that there was an issue in the RAM allocation, and that pretty much every single crash would come down to that memory mapper trying to read or write from space it didn't have access to. And Conker's Bad Fur Day only ever used the initial 4 megabytes of RAM on the Nintendo 64. This was not an expansion pack game, so it would never actually look for the additional 4 megabytes. Now that that's patched in and the address spacing is allocated to write to that additional higher 4 megabytes of RAM, you should never run into a situation in which the game tries to read or write from filled space, because it's now using an additional 4 megabytes of RAM that it technically wouldn't if you just plug the cartridge into your Nintendo 64. And that was very smart thinking on RuleSet's side, because again, I was trying to overcomplicate things, as I am prone to doing, by changing around how it would write to the initial 4 megabytes of RAM. Yes, I thought maybe we could bring something like the RAM expansion pack in, but I was going to save that later on just to see if it could be patched up in my mind easier. But again, I am a filmmaker for a living, not a developer or electric engineer, so I was probably just overcomplicating things in my own head, doing them how I would have done them before. The second area that was almost a guaranteed crash on the normal core was when you would hit this gargoyle with the frying pan. 9 out of 10 times when I would hit him with the pan, I would get an error there. We'd go into the crash handler, and again, we would see that the memory mapper said we were out of space. And I've shown you guys those memory mappers in the previous videos. It's just a block of data, a little bit of a legend showing you where you're trying to read and write from. Again, on this patched version of Conker, it does not freeze there whatsoever, and outside of the patch changing how the memory structure works, this is the retail release of Conker, so there will be absolutely no differences in the gameplay or content. It will be the same Conker you all know, love, and remember just now, apparently, without any freezing whatsoever. And I just absolutely love that. There is a laundry list of people that helped me test when I was gathering all of the data that I did the previous 4 videos on. It was just my imagination and presumption that something could be done in Conker, because once you use that prototype debug ROM from October, suddenly the crashes went from over a dozen plus in a playthrough to under 4, so I knew there was something within that version of the game that was treating things slightly differently than it would be on the retail released game. Going through all of the different cores, going through the crash handlers, testing it on Ares as well as real Nintendo 64 hardware with a flash cart, we were able to find out a lot of things about memory addressing, the largest free allocation and the largest free block of memory, and it really did 100% just point towards an issue when the game was trying to write to certain addresses. And trying to fix stuff like this, it really does take a whole roster of people to get there. I love doing the research work, I love gathering the data, and I love poking at things, kind of like being an orchestra where you have all the different talented musicians around you, because there's somebody out there who's going to look at something and think about it slightly different than you and identify an idea where they just think to themselves, I think if we just did this, it might work. RuleSet decided to try to just force everything to write into that additional 4 megabytes of RAM on the expansion pack. And now in the initial testing again, Conker's Bad Fur Day has been rock solid, stable, uncrashable on the normal Nintendo 64 core, and that should definitely extend out to the Turbo core as well. But like I said earlier, we need more eyes on this because RuleSet can write additional patches if there's any other situations in which a crash is found. But honestly, the reason I started this process in the first place is I just don't like the word no. When we decided that Conker's Bad Fur Day wasn't 100% playable on the core, that just kind of irritated me, and I thought to myself, there must be something I can do to try to help this situation out. I've been making so many videos on MiSTer, so many on the Nintendo 64 guides and tutorials, but I wanted to sink my teeth into a project that was slightly harder and more difficult than stuff I would usually do on the channel, because my area of expertise and knowledge really comes in more of the hardware modding, developing things for arcade boards and such. I don't really touch software all that much. The last thing I did was a demo disc for the 3DO M2 that I released for free. So I'm very happy to be able to tell you that if you pop over to MiSTer Discord today and grab this patch and patch the retail ROM, you should be able to play Conker's Bad Fur Day from start to finish on MiSTer FPGA with absolutely no crashes, the exact way you would play it on real hardware, and that should lower the list of games that quote-unquote don't play on the core by 1, getting that much closer to a completely playable Nintendo 64 library from start to finish on MiSTer FPGA, because there's not many games that don't work, but now Conker's Bad Fur Day presumably can be added to the list of games that you'll have absolutely no problem with, and that to me just makes me so happy. I love stuff like that. I love the fact that this can be done. I love the fact that there's people out there willing to help just because they want to bring everyone a great experience when it comes to these sort of games. And it's just a really fun thing to do, whether it's for releasing games that never saw the light of day for free to people to enjoy, or researching situations like Conker's Bad Fur Day. Anytime I can do something like this, I absolutely will. And once I get a little less tired at looking at Nintendo 64, because I am very tired of seeing these same scenes, maybe I'll pop over to JetForce Gemini and see what can be done there on the research side of things. But big thanks to RuleSet for developing this patch based on information you saw in the videos, and big thanks to RuleSet for making it much simpler than my idea, which was probably needlessly complicated. It would have taken me months to derive a single patch from. But short of that, go over to MiSTer Discord, grab the patch, start helping us test Conker, and hopefully we can say Conker's Bad Fur Day, Conker has been conquered. See you next time. Bye-bye.